is the 19th century, and many people in Italy want Italy to be a country. But the problem is, the governments in Italy don't want Italy to be a country. So, they're going to do a revolution and overthrow all these anti-unification governments to allow Italy to be united. Why did you cheer at that? Just one problem. All these governments, or some of them anyway, are friends with Austria. And so, every time they try to overthrow a government in Italy and, start unification, Austria comes down and helps crush the revolt. Why are you sad about that? So the only way Italy is ever going to be united is if Austria is cut off from Italy entirely. And that means that the country of Piedmont, Sardinia, pretty much the only pro-unification government in Italy, is going to have to invade and push all the way to the Adriatic Sea, cutting off the Austrian forces from Italy. Okay, what have you got against Austria? Just one problem. This is the size of Austria, and this is the size of Piedmont, Sardinia. Do you see the problem here? Okay, that's it. Get out. You're the most annoying class I've ever had. We're continuing this meeting on a Zoom call later. So I can mute you all. I wish COVID never ended. So the only way Piedmont Sardinia is ever going to win a war against Austria is if Austria is at an extremely weak point, and eventually that comes. In 1848, a revolution begins in Vienna, demanding a liberal constitution. The Emperor of Austria is forced to flee and grants the constitution. He says, "Tell the people I agree to everything." Meanwhile, Hungary declares independence, and Venice and Milan all begin revolts. The Austrian forces in Italy are forced to withdraw from Milan. Piedmont Sardinia takes the opportunity to invade and occupies Milan. With the Austrian forces almost entirely cut off, overthrow can begin. Sicily had already declared independence from the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Meanwhile, because of riots, the Papal States, Tuscany and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, were forced to not only give a constitution, providing liberal ideas and checks on their power, but they were also forced to aid in the war against Austria and send troops to the north. Now, they would contribute very little to this. That eventually the Tuscan monarchy would just be overthrown entirely, as was the monarchy in Modena and Parma. Meanwhile, Naples and the Papal States would withdraw from the war in Italy after almost no fighting. The Pope was overthrown and replaced with a Roman Republic. Naples had to focus on the reconquest of Sicily. Nearly every government in Italy, except for the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, had been overthrown by an Italian nationalist government. And all of these governments were sending troops to the north to drive the remaining Austrian forces out. However, victory was not a foregone conclusion, or a conclusion at all in fact, because the Austrians were going to fight back, and they won. They retook all their lost land, and pretty soon, the Piedmontese had been pushed back to the border and forced to sign an armistice. Now, the Austrian counterattack could begin and overthrow all the nationalist governments in Italy. But first, Piedmont was going to make one last-ditch attempt to defeat the Austrians. They never had a chance. Austria invaded them in a surprise attack, marmalized their armies, and the king of Piedmont was forced to abdicate to prevent revolution. Meanwhile, the Austrian army plundered down south. They overthrew the new government of Tuscany, of Modena, of Parma. A combined French-Austrian force attacked the Roman Republic from both sides and overthrew it, restoring the Pope to Rome. Garibaldi, one of the most significant military leaders in the Roman Republic, was forced to flee to the Republic of San Marino, which sheltered him from the Austrians. And I imagine the Austrians just decided it wasn't worth going in and killing him. So with Italian unification efforts shattered on all fronts, it seemed that Austria would maintain control of both Milan and Venice for a long, long time. Or would they? You see, a man called Cavour had recently become Prime Minister of Italy right after they lost the war. And Cavour was determined to conquer both of Milan and Venice, cut off the Austrian forces from Italy. But unlike the last government in Turin, he understood that Piedmont wasn't strong enough to do it themselves. He was going to need the help of France. So Cavour formulated a plan to steal Venice and Milan from Austria, and he called it the Italian job. Step 1, get friendly with France by helping them win a war. Step 2, get France to agree to help you take Venice and Milan. Step 3, take Venice and Milan. You see, in 1853, about 4 years after the War of Italian Independence ended, that one I was just talking about, Russia invaded the Ottoman vassals of Moldavia and Wallachia. The Ottoman Empire launched a counterattack. Ottoman's right, okay? You can't get too powerful, you've left me with no other option. What? I've put my army on the border of the Danubian Principality. If you do not withdraw your troops from those territories, and hand them over to me right now, I will be at war with you. The Ottoman Empire army will hit them from both sides, and we'll take them. No, you can't do this. We're friends, Austria. You can't betray me like this. And just remember how much you owe me, Austria. You'd never have been able to retake Hungary without my help. Well, this is the offer I've laid out for you, Russia. Give me the principalities, or give me war. Oh look, the British and the French are on their way. Would you like to be at war with 4 countries now, Russia? Well, I guess I have no choice. Austria, you can have the principalities. Austria had successfully forced the Russians to withdraw from the principalities, and that had saved the Ottoman Empire from certain collapse. Now, the Ottomans, British and the French wanted to invade Crimea and take over the city of Sevastopol from the Russians. However, the Russian army was massive. They didn't have enough troops to beat it. If only there was somebody who could draw the Russian forces away. And as a matter of fact, there was. Austria put 450,000 troops, more than that in fact, on the Russian border. Prussia and Sweden also put troops on the Russian border. The entire Russian army was pinned against the borders of other countries, not fighting, but they had to be there just in case those countries tried to invade. And that meant that when 50,000 Allied troops landed in Crimea, only 35,000 Russians were there to stop them. And Cavour, on the other hand, saw this as a great opportunity to get friendly with France. He declared war on Russia and sent 15,000 men, a third of the Piedmontese army, to Sevastopol to help with the siege. In 1855, after about a year of siege, Sevastopol would fall. Now, Cavour was friendly with the French. He just had to wait for an opportunity when the French Emperor was feeling particularly affectionate towards Italy to ask him, hey, do you want to maybe go and invade Austria and take some cities from them sometime? Perhaps Milan, the richest city in the entire Austrian Empire, or Venice, second place. And as it happened, he chose a time right after an Italian nationalist had used a bomb to try to assassinate the French Emperor. Now you might be thinking, hey, do you think he'd be not very amicable towards Italian nationalism after one of them had just tried to assassinate him? Well, you would think, but said Italian nationalist had written a letter addressed to Emperor Napoleon III, basically saying that if you set my country free from Austrian domination, 25 million people will love you and follow you forever. So the French Emperor wanted to get a strong ally out of Italy, and so he decided to create it. Literally, he was going to create the country. Or maybe he was scared that there would be another assassination attempt. Either way, the French Emperor promised that if Austria ever launched an act of aggression against Piedmont, they could use that as a justification to go to war and take those 2 provinces from the Austrians. That means that Piedmont simply had to provoke an Austrian attack, and that was difficult because Austria didn't really have a territorial claim on any part of Italy except for the part they already controlled. They had no reason to start a war. They only had stuff to lose. Therefore, why on earth could they ever launch an act of aggression against Piedmont? So Cavour launched a series of military manoeuvres on the Austrian border to try to scare them into attacking. And Austria said, what are you doing that's scaring us, okay? Please stop. And so now, things were escalating, and our good friends Britain and Russia were scared that a war might start. But here's the thing, by absolutely any agreement that had ever been signed, Austria was the rightful owner of North Italy. So when that conference started, it was very obvious who was going to win that debate. Piedmont and France would be forced to back down, recognise permanent Austrian control of those 2 territories, and Italy could never become united. It didn't help that Piedmont was presumably running out of money. They knew that if they were ever going to go to war with Austria, they were going to need as many men as they could get. So, every single year, they had put every penny, every single tax penny, every gram of monetary capital that the Piedmontese government had into the army to ensure they'd be ready for that war with Austria. Okay, and I can only presume that eventually they were running out of money, and eventually they're going to have to stop spending on the army to fend off bankruptcy. However, to be clear, I couldn't find any sources saying they were running out of money. I'm simply inferring that they've spent years putting every single annual putting all their money into the army. I'm just assuming they ran out of money. Either way, the point I'm making here is that Piedmont was running out of time. If they couldn't provoke Austria before that conference started, they would have no hope of even starting this war. All hope was lost until Austria wanted to look really, really tough. They wanted to scare the Piedmontese and force them into backing down. So, they sent them an ultimatum. Dear Piedmont Sardinia, due to the threatening military manoeuvres you've been making on our border, we kindly request that you demobilise your entire army within the next few days. If you do not, then Austria will declare war on you and flatten you. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Bye. Dear Austria, we've considered your request and we've decided not to demobilise our army at all. The reason we decided to do this is because we hate you so much and we'll never do anything you say. You're also a really fat, poopy bum head, and you're also a wimp. You're not going to do it. You're just going to chicken out, like you always do, okay? And also, no balls. You won't do it. No, you're just going to wimp out of it. You complete waste of space. Goodbye. So Austria took the bait and declared war on Piedmont. Austria launched their offensive into Piedmont, but they had chosen the most cautious general ever to lead the attack. And that's a problem. You see, I know in films the bad guy always loses because he's too confident. I promise you, far more wars have been won by over-caution than under-caution, okay? See, Piedmont had been building up their military for years, like I said. And that, combined with the extreme caution of the Austrian general, slowed down the Austrian advance for long enough for French troops to arrive in force. They kicked the Austrian forces out and began a counter-invasion. The French defeated the Austrians in an initial major battle before the Piedmontese and the French linked up to fight Austria in one last decisive battle, the Battle of Solferino. The Piedmontese took up the left flank, the French the centre and the right. The first priority was going to be capturing the mountain range that led through the battle, because any attacks on the flanks could simply be outflanked by the high ground on said mountain range. So that was the primary target. French Emperor Napoleon III held back a cavalry unit on the right flank to be saved for the final blow of the battle. A battle in which France would carry the team. Piedmont only really launched one attack on the left flank, which soon after they lost all the land that they gained. However, they probably did draw the Austrian troops, well, leftwards a bit. Hundreds of thousands of men took part in this battle. This battle was bigger than Waterloo. It was the biggest battle since Leipzig, and it was a battle that the French would win. The Austrians were routed and retreated to within the quadrilateral fortresses, a system of 4 fortresses that made up the nucleus of the Austrian defence of North Italy. Milan was left to be occupied by the invading armies. Just a few weeks earlier, it had looked impossible that anybody except Austria would control North Italy for the next few decades. Now, French and Piedmontese troops slept in Milanese beds. But there was a problem. The quadrilateral is an extremely well-defended position, okay? It's quite hard to break through it. So, if they want to launch another attack and finish the job and take Venice, then that is going to require a lot of casualties, a lot of money, and a lot of time. And in that time, that is more than enough time for Prussia to join the war and escalate the situation, drawing French troops north. So the French Emperor decides to end the war now, because he's not going to attack Venice. Cavour is absolutely furious at this. He spent a decade of his life, okay? He became Prime Minister in 1849. The war began in 1859, a decade later. He spent this entire time working to take both these cities, because the plan only works if you can take both the cities, okay? If Austria still controls Venice, they can still go down and suppress revolts. So sure, you can make so much money from taking a rich city like Milan, but he's absolutely furious that he isn't going to get to take Venice as well. So, everybody has to sign this peace treaty in secret, without him. The Piedmontese king, the French emperor, and the Austrian emperor sign a peace treaty, leaving Venice for the Austrians, Milan for the Piedmontese, and Nice and Savoy are going to be handed over to France by Piedmont in exchange for help in the war. And France had actually been promised Nice and Savoy as help in the war, which they were now going to get. Cavour is furious about this, says they should continue the war without French help, which would have been suicide. It would lead them losing all their gains, and so he resigns in a fit of rage. And for whatever reason, France didn't end up getting Nice and Savoy, even though Piedmont ended up getting Milan. So after looking online, I couldn't find out why France wasn't given Nice and Savoy, but I can only presume Piedmont was like, the deal, buddy, was that you get us 2 cities, in exchange, we give you 2 cities, okay? If you only get us 1 city, we don't give you anything, okay? Screw you! No one loves you, you stupid idiot. That's what I'm assuming, in that despite the terms of the peace treaty was that France would get that, they just refused to give them that because they didn't get Venice. Either way, Piedmont didn't end up giving Nice or Savoy to France. Or did they? You see, during the war, multiple revolutions had started in central Italy in favour of Italian unification. And now that the war was over, they were still being fought in Tuscany, Parma, and Modena. But now that Piedmont had failed to fully cut off the Austrians, that means those revolts were going to fail, right? Because Austria was going to stop them. No. You see, one of the peace terms after Milan was given to Piedmont was that Austria was not allowed to put down those revolts, meaning that she would have to leave the Italian governments to fight the revolutionaries themselves. Now, Austria is perfectly fine with this. They confidently believed the Italian government would simply be able to crush this nationalist revolt, no problem. So she went home, said, that was a nice war. I may have lost Milan, but I can't wait for all those Italian nationalist revolutions to get put down. Oh wait, the revolutions succeeded! Tuscany, Modena, Parma, and even part of the northern papal states were under Italian nationalist control. Austria had been fully cut off from the peninsula. And here's the thing, all those new rebel governments went to Piedmont, Sardinia, and said, can we get annexed? The unification of Italy had finally begun. But not if France had anything to say about it. France said, absolutely not. We shall not be letting Piedmont get too powerful. You see, France feared Piedmont, okay? They didn't want Piedmont to become allies with, say, Prussia or somebody and fight them in a two-front war. France was terrified. So France and Piedmont cut a deal. They would give France Nice and Savoy, and in exchange, France would recognise the Piedmontese annexation of the central provinces. Now let's move on to Sicily. Remember when Sicily declared independence in 1848? Well, they were pretty quickly reconquered by the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, and they didn't like being ruled by the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Now, do you remember this guy Garibaldi? Well, Garibaldi had been a prominent player in the revolution that overthrew the Papal States and replaced it with the Roman Republic. And obviously then, France had defeated the Roman Republic and Garibaldi had taken refuge in San Marino. Well, now Garibaldi had moved to Turin, and he'd actually been a commander in the Second Italian War of Independence. That's the one I just talked about. So people in Sicily went to Garibaldi and said, hey, can you come down south and lead a revolt against the Kingdom of Two Sicily? He answered, only if a revolt is already occurring for me to take command of. I don't want to have to start the revolt myself. So they hold up at that end of the deal. The Piedmontese launch a revolution against the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, and it is a disaster. You see, the Bourbon government found out about the revolt, so within a matter of hours, the revolution was crushed. But that revolution made the people angry, and so even more revolutions began, inspired by the revolution in Messina and Palermo. But pretty soon, all hope was lost. The rebels were losing, okay? The only thing that could possibly save them was if Garibaldi showed up, because he was so popular he would definitely boost morale. But they didn't even know if Garibaldi even intended to show up yet. Despite that, somebody made up the lie that Garibaldi was on his way, and that kept morale up just long enough for Garibaldi to actually show up in Sicily. The Sicilians had kept up their end of the deal. Now it was time for Garibaldi to get on his way and take command of the rebellion. He put together a volunteer force of 1,000 men. Now this was barely an army, okay? These weren't soldiers. This was an angry mob with guns, with no training, no drill. The best way to describe Garibaldi's army was a bunch of heavily armed hikers. But it wasn't all he had at his disposal to take over Sicily with. He was going to take command of the entire rebellion. So he got on a bunch of ships and got on his way. There was just one problem. Nice was his hometown, and Garibaldi dreamed of uniting Italy. He was going to take over Sicily and make it part of the new Kingdom of Italy, okay? And then he was going to go for Naples, make that part of Italy, and then he was going to go for Rome and make that part of Italy. Why do I keep dropping the spoon? But he really wanted his hometown, Nice, to be a part of Italy. And now it was holding a referendum, and almost certainly going to become a part of France as part of that deal that Piedmont made with France to annex the central provinces. So he came up with a cunning plan to make sure Nice ended up as a part of Italy. He was going to take his 1,000 men, land at Nice instead of Sicily, and smash all the ballot boxes on the referendum day. And this show of force would hopefully mean that when they finally got the referendum reset up again, then all the people would vote to stay a part of Piedmont instead. Just one problem, if he did this, France would become his eternal enemy. The French Navy would come down and intercept him. He had no chance of going to Sicily. So he pushed his emotions aside and made the rational choice. If he wanted Italian unification, he was going to have to disregard Nice, his hometown. Instead, he was going straight for Sicily. Now, the forces in Sicily had 25,000 men to defend against an army of poorly armed hikers, effectively. So what do you think the first thing they did when they found that Garibaldi had arrived in Sicily? They called for reinforcements, that's right. They asked those reinforcements to get behind Garibaldi and outflank him, but after Garibaldi pushed too deep into the island, they decided to just bring them to Palermo to help defend the city. But Garibaldi had no shortage of new recruits. Soon the rebels swelled his force to 2,000 men, and soon enough he was fighting 2,000 Bourbon troops in battle. But not all of his army was present on the field. He only had 1,000 men present on the field against 2,000 Bourbon. His army of, by the way, so little ammo that some of them only had 10 bullets each, with no training, no drill. This was not an army, this was an angry mob. But still, he ordered his army to launch an uphill attack against 2,000 trained forces with some of the finest muskets in the world. But despite the fact that Garibaldi's men had literally so little ammo that, again, some of them had like 10 bullets each. You'll never guess which side ran out of ammo first. Well, would you believe it? It was the defenders. Not all of them though. Some of the Bourbon troops ran out of ammo and started throwing stones instead. So Garibaldi stood up in the middle of the battle with a sword. By the way, these accounts, okay? The accounts of this battle, they say history is written by the winners. Well, that's true, okay? The accounts of this battle are almost certainly intended to make Garibaldi look more glorious than he actually is. But apparently what happened was Garibaldi stood up in the middle of the battle and said, "Come on, men," with a sword. "Come on, men." Where's my sword? "Come on, men, they are throwing stones. Their ammunition is spent. So let's go up that hill and biffity-bosh baff the heck out of them." So they charged up the hill, and I quote, "Nobody pretended to remember what happened at the top of that ridge, but they routed the royalist forces." So he had just won a battle where he had absolutely no hope of winning, and he had just gone and won. And that boosted his confidence, and his army swelled from 2,000 to now 4,000 men, and he was going to go and attack an even bigger target. Palermo was the capital of the island, defended by 20,000 men. Garibaldi attacked the city as numerous people revolted against the Bourbon government there. But pretty soon, he was out of ammunition and on the brink of being defeated. Luckily, the British came along and offered their ship as a location for negotiations. So Garibaldi quickly agreed to that, and both sides signed an armistice. So with Garibaldi's campaign looking to be at an end, it seemed that this attempt had failed. Or had it? You see, at this moment, the forces of Two Sicilies did something. And nobody knows why they did something. Maybe they thought the British were about to intervene on the side of Garibaldi. Maybe they overestimated the size of Garibaldi's force. Maybe they were bribed, okay? That was what the rumours said. Maybe they believed all of Palermo was about to rise up and throw them out. But either way, they withdrew their entire 20,000 strong force to Naples. 20,000. So clearly either something nefarious was happening behind the scenes, or they just overestimated Garibaldi. But either way, Garibaldi was on the brink of defeat, and suddenly the Naples army just withdrew. But in the eyes of Sicily, it looked like Garibaldi had just assaulted a fortified position, defended by 20,000 men, using only 4,000 men, and took the city. And so his recruits just swelled up. Soon, his army had grown to 17,000 men, and he divided into 3 groups. He sent one group south to take Syracuse, another group south to take Catania. He himself went for Messina. But the Bourbons saw him coming and sent a force to stop him before he got to Messina. The Bourbons had 4,500 men against Garibaldi's 4,000 men. However, the Bourbons would still lose. Pretty soon their remaining forces fell back into a castle. The government at Naples ordered the navy to go and salvage the situation, but the navy refused. Now that the navy had deserted, they knew there was no way they were going to win that battle. This meant that Garibaldi's navy, consisting of exactly one ship, had just gained sea superiority over the entire island. And that one ship had, by the way, defected from the Neapolitan navy. However, the Kingdom of Two Sicilies was able to evacuate the surviving troops to Messina. Meanwhile, in the south, Syracuse had fallen. Catania had held out for 15 days before its surviving members escaped to Messina. Garibaldi launched his attack on Messina and took the city. He had landed on Sicily with 1,000 men. Now, his army was up to 40,000, and he wasn't going to stop conquering. Piedmont decided to tell them, no, please don't launch an invasion of Italy. So Garibaldi launched an invasion of Italy, okay? He landed in the toe of Italy as the city of Potenza rose against the Bourbons. In theory, the Bourbon monarchy had 80,000 men defending them against Garibaldi. In reality, these men had absolutely no loyalty. They either ran, defected, or surrendered every single battle. So Garibaldi faced almost no resistance. The king didn't bother defending his capital. He evacuated and faced Garibaldi in one last battle, the Battle of the Volturno River. With 28,000 against 20,000, he attempted to envelop Garibaldi's force on both sides. He failed and was defeated. His remaining forces fell back into the last surviving fortress. Meanwhile, Piedmont invaded the Papal States and came in from the north. A referendum would be held over all the territory of Piedmont and all the territory of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Should we unite the two countries to form the Kingdom of Italy? And the answer was yes. The Kingdom of Italy was created with its capital city at Florence. But there was still one last thing to do. They had to assault the city of Geta, the last holdout of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And worse, Spain, France had all sent naval reinforcements to help defend the city. So Piedmont had less men, less artillery guns, and less ships than Geta, which is why the city held out for about a year before finally it fell. Italy was a country, but they didn't yet control Venice or Rome. In 1866, Prussia looked like it was about to go to war with Austria, so Italy signed an agreement that if, within the next 90 days, Prussia ended up at war with Austria, Italy would join too. War began, and Italy invaded Austria. This was the Third Italian War of Independence, and this time, third time lucky, finally, Venice would end up under Italian control. So now there are only two cities in Italy that weren't controlled by Italy. San Marino, which they had spared as a thank you for sheltering Garibaldi from the Austrians, and Rome, because the French forces had arrived in Rome to defend it from Italy. They didn't want it to fall, they didn't want Italy to get too powerful. However, in 1870, Prussia would invade France, and France required all of its forces from all over its empire to defend its capital city. So, their forces in Italy were withdrawn, leaving the Pope at the mercy of the Italians. Rome would fall. The Pope escaped to the Vatican, giving Italy nearly its modern borders. And that is how Italy became a country.